Okay, now that you have a general idea as to the different types of mouth parts, let's get into some real specializations. Just a quick reminder, remember from last time, we talked about that there were two groups of mouth parts, right? The mandibular mouth parts, which are the chewing and the most primitive parts, and the haustellate mouth parts, which are much more specialized and include things like piercing and sucking mouth parts, probing and sipping, and sponging and lapping mouth parts. Now let's just go through a very quick reminder of the parts that make up a full-fledged mouth part. So starting with the labrum. The labrum is the anterior-most mouth part, and the muscles are attached to the labrum to move it outward, move it upward, that sort of thing. So it can move up and away from the other mouth parts during taking a bite and inwards during feeding. The mandibles will actually capture the food. They'll break it up into smaller pieces. The size and the shape of these incisors or these molars on this mouth part, so remember that apex, those cutting implements and those grinding ones toward the posterior surface, these are going to vary with the diet of the insect. The harder the food that they have to eat, or the more cellulose in the food they have to eat, the more molars they're going to have. The more that they have to cut their food, the more mandible or the more incisors that they're going to have. The maxillae, or for single maxilla, are the ones that move food particles backwards into the preoral cavity. They're the ones that have the sensory organs in the form of maxillary palps. They can do some cutting. They can do that sort of thing. The labium is a protective lower lip, and it contains those labial palps that can also act as a sensory organ. And finally, the hypopharynx functions as a tongue, but it doesn't have those taste buds. Those are on the palps, remember? And it moves food around the preoral cavity. So that's our basic setup of our mouth parts. Now, when you analyze mouth parts, not only do you want to look at the individual mouth parts and how they have changed or stayed the same from this very basic primitive form and how we understand these mandibular mouth parts, but you also want to look at how the mouth parts are oriented in space. There are some major orientations of the mouth parts when we're looking at insects. There's 3 of them that I want you to know. And these 3 can all tell you about something about the insect's life's history, what they're doing, how they're feeding, that sort of thing. So the first is hypognathous. So this hypognathous orientation, this is what you can see up in this upper right here, hypognathous. So this is when the mouth parts are directed ventrally downward. Okay, so this is where the insects are sort of walking across something. Their mouth parts are facing downwards. When you're standing on something, your mouth part's going to be directly over it. So this is the primitive condition in Insecta, the primitive condition in this entire class. It's found in a lot of plant feeders, a lot of generalist feeders like thrips or Thysanura, the cockroaches, the mantids, and plant-eating beetles. So you can expect the insects with this hypognathous type of mouthpart orientation to be feeding on something that isn't going to try to run away or fly away. You can stand on it and you can feed on it. The second orientation is the prognathous mouth parts. So these are directed forward. So if you look at this drawing right here, you can see this forward direction of the mouth parts. So they're directed forward. They're very common in carnivorous groups, groups that have to actively pursue their prey. We see this in things like earwigs, like larval lacewings, beetles, termite soldiers, and in ants. Finally, the episionathous, see that here? These have the mouth parts that are directed backwards or directed towards the posterior end of the insect. These are very common in things like true bugs and orders with sucking mouth parts, especially those that have to fly around a lot. So this orientation can allow for the mouth parts to kind of stay out of the way while the insect is moving around and then be moved forward while feeding on something. So these are our 3 major orientations: hypognathous, prognathous, and episionathous. All right, Now, let's take a look at some of the major mouthpart adaptations close up as they sit on an insect. So I have shown you a couple of times now the dissected out mouthpart. So you should know what these different words mean. The labrum, maxillary palp, mandibles, labial palps, hypopharynx, labium, maxilla, right? So you understand where they're at. Let's look how they are in an actual living, or in this case, a picture of an insect. So let's start again with the mandibulate mouthparts, the ancestral form. So as you can see, all the major parts are here. This is what they look like on an actual insect. So you've got this labrum up at the top here. That's over here on this insect here. The mandibles are on either side. Mandibles there. Okay, you've got the maxillae sort of tucked in behind the mandibles. You can kind of see it poking out underneath those ginormous mandibles on this beetle here. You've got your labial palps, sort of down at the bottom. And you've got your maxillary palps on the sides. Okay, so all of these parts are here. You cannot see the hypopharynx in this drawing because that is inside the preoral cavity. So you can't even see it in this actual photo of an insect. So here's where they're at, or how they sit on an insect's face without being exploded outwards due to dissection. Now here, we've got a close-up of a cockroach feeding. So this cockroach feeding, you can see that labrum really clearly right at the top there. See how it's moving upward and outward attached to that clypeus. You got those muscles. You can see the labium at the bottom with those two labial lobes. You can see the palps hanging off of the mandibles and the maxillae and the labium. So you can see everything, how it works together to form this preoral cavity. All right. Now, let's go on to the haustellate mouthparts. Remember that these are primarily sucking mouthparts. This is the form that is going to have some very different anatomy due to the feeding on liquid food, right? So the major difference in the presence of, in these haustellate mouthparts is the presence of a sucking tube. So this tube is the means by which liquid food is drawn into that preoral cavity and ultimately into the digestive system. Mouthparts used to form this structure, this feeding tube, vary among different groups, but they're derived from the same basic parts that are found in the mandibulate insects. So all those parts are there to some extent, and they're just modified very, very highly. So the presence of a sucking tube like this necessitates the presence of a sucking pump. So the sucking pump is what creates the negative pressure inside the preoral cavity that is necessary to draw food into the mouth. Think of it as if you had a straw in your mouth, right? You have to form that negative pressure in your mouth in order to get the food or the liquid up into that straw. Now, how the sucking pump is formed, this varies among groups, but it often results in a large muscle in the head capsule. So you'll see large muscles up in this head area here, maybe back here near that pharyngeal region, that sort of thing. So you have these larger muscles to allow for this negative pressure formation. This will often mean that there has to be more room in the area of that head capsule. So you get a large lump or a larger different form of the head capsule. So it looks different from what you would see in the chewing mouthparts or an insect with these mandibulate mouthpart types. Many insects with sucking mouthparts also have a salivary pump. They use this for injecting saliva into the preoral cavity. In these cases, the food canal and the salivary duct can create this over and under double barrel shotgun type of look. So you'll see a salivary canal, which can allow for salivary juices to go out, and on top of that or underneath that, you'll see another tube, which is the actual food canal. So they work in concert like that. So you got the over and under double barrel shotgun look for the salivary gland or for the salivary tube and for the feeding tube. So this drawing that you see here gives you a general idea as to the basic parts of the haustellate mouthparts. Notice that all the basics are still here. You get the labrum at the top. Okay, it looks a little smaller. The mandibles and the maxillae are there in varying degrees of elongated changes. The hypopharynx is there, and the labium. However, they look significantly different from the mandibular mouth parts, since some of these parts are elongated, some are residual, some are much, much shortened, especially in the maxillae. Remember those 3 different lobes of the maxillae? I didn't make you learn the different names, but those 3 different lobes of maxillae have varying degrees of change. Now, this change is most obvious in the piercing and sucking mouth parts. So this is the head of a mosquito. You can see that all the different parts are there. You can still see in this bottom right, you got the labrum, the maxillary palps, the mandibles, the labial palps, hypopharynx, labium, maxilla. You have this extra salivary canal formed out of something else. Okay. So all of them are there, but they're really, really elongate. So start with the labrum in this case. So the labrum is here. So here's the cross section of the mosquito mouth parts. Here's the side view, and here's the actual picture of the mouth parts. So this labrum is forming this elongated and almost totally enclosed tube that is angular at the apex. Okay, so over here we've got our labrum all along right there. All right, so super, super elongate. The hypopharynx is greatly elongated, okay? And so it forms this extra long thing right behind the labrum there. Okay, so it's also elongate, and it forms a singular stylet, which contains a very thin salivary canal. So it will work in concert with the labrum in that double barrel shotgun over and under form. So you have that food canal on the top, that labrum on top that will then have the hypopharynx at the bottom to form that food canal. The mandibles and the maxillae are modified into these really thin, acutely pointed structures on either side of the food canal. So here you got the mandibles, here you got the maxillae right behind it. Mandibles and maxillae. So these will act as a stylet for opening wounds. The maxillae will have these fine serrations at the tip. So the maxillae are the main organ for piercing into the skin when it comes to mosquitoes. Now, inside the head, there are muscles that are attached to the maxillae, which move the mouth parts forward and backward, allowing for the mosquito to actually probe with her mouth parts in order to find the perfect spot to bite you. The labium will form a long gutter-like structure. So you can see it here. This whole huge thing is the labium. Back here, this whole huge thing is the labium. This is the labium back here. Okay, so it forms this labial structure, this long, elongate, gutter-like structure that will cover all the rest of these mouth parts, all the sharp bits and the feeding canal and everything like that, so that it'll keep those things protected and out of the way when the mosquito is flying around or just sitting around, whatever. Okay? When it feeds, that bottom lip area, that labium, will move out of the way. It'll sort of fold itself backwards onto the flesh, and the labrum and the hypopharynx will be inserted into the hole that the mandibles and the maxillae cut. That's how the insect gets the blood. So here's a mosquito feeding. You can see she's got that labium at the bottom there moved out of the way. Her mandibles and maxillae are on either side of the food canal, which is now inserted into the flesh there, and she's actively feeding. Okay, so if you watch here for a minute, you're going to see that her abdomen is starting to get a little bit bigger. So what she's doing here is she is injecting an anticoagulant into the skin or into the flesh, and then the animal's heartbeat, or the human's heartbeat in this case, is forcing the blood into the digestive system. So you can see as she feeds more and more, that digestive system is going to get bigger and bigger. That abdomen is going to expand more and more and fills up with blood. So this is why when you smack a feeding mosquito, you get a little bit of blood everywhere because you just popped it out of her abdomen. Okay, we're going to stop there. Up next, we're going to look at a few more very specialized mouth parts and how they sit in an actual insect. Let me know if you have any questions.